In February of 2022, Ukrainian President Zelensky was thrust into the international spotlight.
A new book shares stories from the front lines and from Zelensky's family and his team as they navigate life in the midst of war. Time magazine correspondent Simon Schuster spent 4 years traveling with Zelensky and interviewing him, his wife, friends, advisors, and enemies.
The book is The Showman, Inside the Invasion That Shook the World and Made a Leader of Zelensky. And Simon joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning. Nice to be with you.
Nice to be with you. I think people know the story that he had been an entertainer, and it's kind of shocking that he becomes the leader of a nation, especially in a time of war. Was he prepared for this moment?
I think he shocked all of us. He shocked the world when he stepped up the way he did. But I'm not sure if there's really anyone who would be prepared for the moment he faced in February 2022. I mean, who is prepared for a nuclear superpower coming to take over your entire country and kill you and your family? I mean, in that kind of situation, everyone needs to think on their feet. And I think he showed a lot of resilience and dynamism in the way he jumped into action in that moment.
So when you spent all of this time with him in the bunkers and whatnot, tell us a side of him that the public might not know that you discovered.
I mean, one thing from early in his presidency is that he did have a difficult time transitioning into politics, in that as an entertainer, he was used to being adored and beloved by his audience. As a politician, that quickly goes away, and he had a hard time facing the criticism that he got just from regular people on social media, from television channels, from journalists. And he was really, it took him a while to grow the thick skin that one needs to really step into the role of a president, a political leader.
Did he have, though, any sort of natural, instinctive political skills that allowed him, let's say, to manage his military leaders well?
I think he had the skills that he really needed to fight this particular war. And he had developed those skills as a showman over about 20 years in the entertainment industry. What he needed to do in those early hours and days of the invasion was grab all of our attention and keep it for as long as possible to keep us on his side. And he did that by speaking not only to the political leaders in foreign countries, but to all of us, to the people who elected foreign leaders, to make sure that we put pressure on our elected officials to keep supporting Ukraine, keep sending weapons, keep sending money. And he did that by really grabbing and holding our attention for as long as he has.
And what is the relationship with the public in Ukraine? Are they still behind him? How has that pivoted as the war has progressed?
Sure. I mean, he's still very popular, but it's been declining. In the first month of the invasion or so, the support he had was around 90%, according to public opinion polls. Now that's declined to the area of around 60%, a steep drop. I guess something you would expect after 2 years of such painful and difficult war. But there have been a lot of questions raised about, could Ukraine have been more prepared? Could it have gotten its forces into a better position before the invasion started to save more lives and save more territory that has now fallen under Russian occupation? Those kinds of questions are bubbling up, and they are certainly eroding his popularity as kind of politics returns to wartime Ukraine.
Yeah, let me ask you about that. They clearly need the West's help, and I think some Americans are looking at this and just see money going out the window. Can you explain to people what's at stake if Ukraine falls?
I think the most important thing to keep your eyes on there is listen to what the Russians are saying. Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, but also Russian Kremlin propaganda channels, they talk every day, all the time, about their intentions to fight the West, to fight the Americans, to keep going in this war as they intend to swallow up all of Ukraine. They do intend to keep attacking Europe. They talk about this openly all the time on their propaganda channels. So they make no secret of this. I think it's perfectly reasonable to imagine, if we take the Russians at their word, that after Ukraine, they will aim to build more military power to attack American allies, including NATO allies, that the United States is treaty bound to defend. So just listen to what the Russians say. There's no secret here.
Does President Zelensky expect this war to continue for a long time? What's your sense?
He's certainly preparing for Ukraine to be in this for the long haul. So are his military generals. He's in no mood to negotiate at this stage, and he's preparing the mechanisms to continue fighting, even if, for example, Donald Trump returns to the White House and tries to shut off the taps and cut off aid. I think Ukraine is really focused now on developing its own weapons production, building the systems it needs to keep fighting and not be pressured or pushed into some kind of capitulation or negotiation that it doesn't want to participate in.
All right, the book is The Showman, Inside the Invasion That Shook the World and Made a Leader of Zelensky, and you can follow Simon on X. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.